Okay, let's see if this is live. I don't know. We don't even know if this is live. It looks like we're live. It looks like it's going live, but we're so unprofessional here at the cross-examine instructor. I am so unprofessional. I cannot speak for you.
Does their internet work?
Yeah. Actually, it looks like we're live here, buddy. Let me see. Yeah, well, I don't know what kind of run. Diego, are you?
Yeah, it's live.
It's live. You sure?
Yeah.
Can they hear
I don't
us?
believe you, man. Yeah, probably hear us.
Well, whatever live audience we had when you started is gone.
It's gone now. Yeah, unfortunately, it's gone. There you go. Actually, look like everybody's like, yeah. This,
hey, look, there's two
this
viewers.
All guys. So, yes, two viewers. That's all. There's two viewers. He's joking. There's two viewers actually. Hello.
We're all gathered around Alisa.
Yeah. Okay, guys. So, everybody who is on the other side of the screen. Hello, my name is Jorge Gill, and I'm the Executive Director for Cross-Examine, and I have this group of awesome people here from the Cross-Examine Instructor Academy. And Greg just asked me, why are we doing this live stream? And I said, well, I flew $5,000 worth of equipment here, and I have to justify it to Frank. So that's what we're doing here.
For
but now
for
all the donors.
watching.
That's right. Just make sure, and the IRS in
tax
case
dollars
they.
at
That's
work.
right. So we are here. We're going to be asking this guy's questions. So make sure that you put the questions on the chat. If you're watching on our YouTube channel, smash that like button, that bell to notifications for you, and start putting your questions on the chat, and I'm going to be reading it. So just anybody here with a mic, tell us, what is the CIA? What are we doing here for the audience?
CIA is a program that takes individuals who want to invest in their church or their school or in other Christians and want to teach them more effectively apologetic content, takes them and says, hey, let's do 3 days of intense training with you, teach you not only the content, but how to deliver the content, how to be a better communicator, how to maybe build a platform that will get this truth out there in greater ways. And so you get to come, you get to hear from all these great folks, but you also get an opportunity to you get to present for 15 minutes and then get feedback from your peers, get feedback from a professional speaker who will evaluate you, all for the purpose of helping to hone your skills to become a better communicator so you can ultimately speak the truth of Christianity effectively and equip the church.
Well done, Brett. And Alisa Childers is an example of that, a student multiple times at CIA, and now the last few years been a fabulous presenter. So, of course, you were pretty good when you started, when you first came here. I remember, you reminded me that you were in...
He doesn't remember. He didn't remember.
I thought you were in my class first.
No, Jim was my very, very first instructor.
Okay.
Yeah.
So anyway, wherever you're at, you can up your game. No matter where you're at, you can improve your ability to communicate. You can improve your understanding. And one of the things that I really like myself about this gathering is because we get to hang out with each other. We're all friends. A lot of times we're here, hither, thither, and yon, and working. But this gives us a chance to work together, and it's an advantage for also the students here because. We have one-on-one interaction. We have meals together, or some morning, afternoon, evening interaction, conversing, answering questions, doing the best we can in a short period of time to kind of disciple the others who are part of this. And I think that's one of the unique things about CIA.
Yeah, and it's professionals and non-professionals. It's anyone who wants to make an impact. So we have Sunday school teachers who show up, and we have college professors, and we have pastors, and we have youth leaders, and everything in between. Yeah.
Awesome. Now let's go ahead on Diego to see if you can turn up the volume a little bit at the end. Some people asking, and you do that. Over there in Restream. Frank, come on in. You can just sit in anywhere. I want to ask right there in the floor in the middle. Yeah.
No, we got
We got some room here. Okay, and and the question my question for you, Frank, is why you started CIA?
Because I think there was a big void in people who knew apologetics at the church level. And so I thought we needed to try and at least train people as best we could in a short period of time people who had an affinity for it already, not people off the street, but people who are interested in it. Could we get them before the best in the world right here, so they could learn from these people and get to know them and maybe even network a little bit and give them opportunities?
Yeah, that's good. We're going to take some questions from the audience, so we're not going to do a whole Q&A, but we're going to take a few selected questions. Who was the startup team for the CIA?
Greg, Brett, Richard, and was Tom? Jesus was in it. Was Tom Howe in it? Was your brother in it one year?
You know what? I don't know.
He may have been. Gary Habermas. It was just like 4 or 5 of us, and we had a guest lecturer.
There's another guy who lived in Charlotte. We used to stay at his house.
The mountain climber guy. I know.
Larry Blythe was part of it. Yeah, Larry Blythe was part of it. And then we used to bring in a guest speaker who would just kind of be the headliner, but then we decided this is more of a granular event. It's more of a roll up your sleeves, kind of help one another present kind of event, so we don't have that kind of speaker anymore. Everybody here instructs other people on how to present and how to answer questions. So that's what we do. We don't just present to people, they present to us.
Right. Yeah. So it's a hands-on intensive training for 3 days. Yeah. Diego, can you turn up the handheld mics? They said that my mic is doing pretty good. So I don't know what other stories you want to share about CIA. Go ahead.
Are there always more people that attempt to or apply than you take in?
Just a few. People know it's a small event. There's only 60 people here because we can't take more than 60 because we wouldn't be able to have them present to us. Every instructor gets like 6 or 7 students, and that's the kind of personal attention they get.
I know that for my years at taking in the applications and going through the application process, some years we have an excess of 20 to 25 students. Sometimes it's during COVID, we actually had, I think, 55 people, and at the end we end up with like 60 because some people wanted to come right at the very end. But we always close the application process for about a month or 2, and then as soon as we reopen it, people start put in applications almost a year ahead of time. So for everybody who wants to be part of it, just go to our website and check on the events tab to make sure that the application process is open. I do want to go around and do a round of, and I know that when people ask which one is your favorite argument for the existence of God, we usually look at a cumulative case. But let's go ahead on and give our audience which one you think is the most persuasive.
We can't start with Richard, though, because we'll be here an hour.
Oh, yeah. Well, he'll do all the work for us, and then we justify bringing the equipment, and then we can go home.
Here we go. Mind blown. Go ahead. So I'm not sure if I know exactly what you're asking. My favorite argument for God's existence, it would be Aquinas's argument as he gives it in several different versions in his Summa Theologia. So it's a metaphysical or philosophical argument.
Which would be the one we saw in
but
class.
it's my favorite only in the sense that I think it's the most, it not only delivers God's existence, but once that existence is demonstrated, all the classical attributes of God cascade inexorably from that. However, it's not my favorite in the sense that it's not practical most of the time because it requires so much sort of weird sounding metaphysics that by the time you introduce that, you've lost people. Right. Yeah. So in the terms of just the marketplace, I think a lot of these scientifically oriented kind of arguments, fine tuning, these kind of things are much more effective. And frankly, a person should be able to walk out at night, look at a starlit sky, and know there's a God. It's only because there have been such an increase of toxic voices over the centuries, especially in Western thinking, that sometimes you have to massage the conversation to get that to the point that, because how could Richard Dawkins look at the complexity of biological and still think of the flying spaghetti monster? Something's broken down there. And it's obviously the fall. But I'll end with this. When OSHA...
Look at me like you have to end. No, keep going.
No. Well, you were the one that made some comment about me going an hour. When OSHA comes in and investigates, let's say a worker in a factory falls off a scaffolding and gets injured. So OSHA comes in, and they send to investigate, well, what happened here? Well, obviously, OSHA is not looking for the answer, oh, it was gravity. And, okay, Well, yeah, gravity explains all falls. But what they're asking is, in this particular instance, why did gravity prevail over something else like safety? So obviously, the fall, no pun intended, of Adam and Eve is why all evil is in the world and why there's atheism. But I think what we really need to address, and what we try to address as apologists, is yeah, we know that it's man's fallen. That's why there are atheists or critics. But we want, in this particular instance, why does their atheism prevail? Why is a Richard Dawkins missing it? And that's why I'm drawn to the philosophical, because I think a lot of it are philosophical assumptions they are being scandalized by that they don't even know they have, and that's why I like it. As far as my favorite.
Good. And you said favorite argument, right? Yeah. So for me, I'm not. I know what you mean. I would have said, what's your favorite piece of evidence? So I'm not really interested in arguments because I can't use it. You can argue from evidence in front of a jury, but I'm really trying to assemble a case for which the best inference is God. And for me, it's always going to be cumulative. So I can't really focus on one because you would never do that in a jury trial. If I've got 30 pieces of evidence, I'm going to use all 30 pieces of evidence. So I think it's the strength of all the cumulative case that's actually, but it's never going to come out in argument form, right? We're not going to be able to do that. When we're presenting evidence in the evidence show, it's going to be just the evidences that we think are best inference is God. So for me, it's going to be an
Okay, no. Take the mic back. Is there one piece of evidence that you find more persuasive?
People always say, what was the thing, Jim, that tipped the tables for you? Well, nothing. It was the weight of all of it. I can honestly say.
But is there any kind of hierarchy? Wouldn't you say, well, the strength of this piece of evidence it weighs more than this piece of evidence? Like,
no, I can't. I don't think. I honestly don't. For me personally, I don't think there is. Now, if I'm going to contextualize it for somebody I'm talking to, then of course I'm going to pull from that palette of evidences where I think that this person is either hung up or might like, for example, when I'm talking to a lot of cops, the moral argument is the place I can go because we all have a sense that we're doing more than enforcing the personal opinion of our mayor or even the personal opinions of our governor or the group who got elected. We actually think there's something transcendent in these moral laws. So I can maybe start there because that's the group I might be talking to.
But there's nothing that's more cogent for you?
No. Okay. Honestly, there isn't. I mean, you'll see, I always say that, hey, when I make a case for Christianity, it's this huge diagram. You got 2 hours. It's going to take me 2 hours to go through that because that's what persuaded me. Is at some point, I'm always the last guy to think you did it because I've been burned on one piece of evidence that I thought, oh, this looks like our guy right here. And I will chase that guy hard for 2 weeks to find out it's not him. I'm like, okay, that was stupid. I mean, let's make the whole cumulative case be the last guy to say, that's our guy. And you probably have the right guy. So I want to be the last. I want to wait.
But you kind of think like he doesn't trust you, though, right? Like he's coming off like he doesn't believe you.
Like Brett?
Yeah, he's questioning you.
Brett's a jerk.
I know. Well, I hardly ever believe him.
Exactly. And the only reason
I am a jerk.
We've known each other for 20 years, and he's, by the way, he's been a jerk for, let's see, all of those years.
Wait, can you build a cumulative case?
I can.
Wait, I should never mind. Never mind.
If you want.
What am I doing?
You can just ask Aaron. You're done.
Yeah.
Well,
where is Aaron? Give Aaron. Let's just have Aaron tell us his cumulative case.
Well, I'm going to actually answer the question.
Thank you.
And offer one thought, but I think there's a lot of different pieces of evidence, as Jim was saying. But one, I think strategically, I like one approach because it doesn't require any individual to have any specialized piece of information. If you're going with a cosmological argument, you have to know what that means and then what the evidences are in Big Bang cosmology, blah, blah, blah. Or if you go to teleology, you got to look at design parameters and this and that and the other thing. But there's one thing that everybody knows, no matter where they lived or when they lived, and they know that something's wrong with the world. Everybody knows this. It's universal, which is why the problem of evil is such a universal kind of concern, complaint against the existence of God. Well, it turns out that the problem of evil itself, which everybody is aware of, is one of the best evidences for God and one of the best evidences against atheism. And when you realize this, you realize it's not the theist who has the problem of evil, it's the atheist. And just one angle of it, it isn't that the theist doesn't have to make sense of a powerful God who is also all-knowing and all-loving and still allows evil. That's a concern. That's answerable. But the point I'm making is you cannot raise the issue. You can't ask the question unless there is real evil in the world. And if relativism is true, there's no real evil. And a lot of people think they're relativists, and if that's the card they're going to play, then they've got to abandon the problem of evil. If there are no laws, there are no broken laws. But if it turns out that there are laws that can be broken for the problem of evil, then the question becomes, who is the appropriate authority to make the laws that govern the universe morally, okay? And so very quickly, I think, and very simply, you get to a very good argument for the existence of a God that is the appropriate moral authority over the universe, who makes the laws that are broken that ground the notion of the problem of evil. So the problem of evil becomes one of the best evidences for God, not against God.
Let me push back on that and ask you a question, if I may, so you can unpack it a little bit more. And that is, sometimes I've heard the problem of evil framed not so much that there is this evil out there, and so you can't explain to me why God allows this evil, so there must not be your God. And your point is,
right,
well, if there isn't this God, you wouldn't be able to characterize this as evil in the first place. But sometimes the argument, as I've heard it, is framed that, well, in your Christian position is internally inconsistent, because the Christian is claiming both that there's a God who's all powerful, all good, and that there's an evil, and they're just saying they're not compossible.
Yeah.
So what would you say?
So,
in that
so that is the workaround for the point that I'm making. However, in my experience, I have almost never heard the problem of evil raised in that way. The common person is going to say, how do you explain all the evil in the world if God is good and powerful and loving, kind of thing? So they're acknowledging the existence of evil. Now, if somebody comes at me that direction, I do have a response. And the response is, tell me exactly what the nature of the contradiction is. And the difficulty for the deductive problem of evil, which is what you're talking about, the internal contradiction, is nobody's been able to put together anything like a sound or valid syllogism that shows that there is a necessary incompatibility between being God being good and powerful and evil in the world. Because they're assuming that if God were good and powerful, he wouldn't allow it. But the fact is, he might allow it if he had a good reason for it. So is it possible there's a good reason that God would allow evil, maybe for a season, and still be good and powerful? And the answer to that is, yeah, there's lots of possibilities, and that's what theodicy is meant to accomplish.
And that's a good point you're making, too, because that dichotomy is always offered. If God is all-loving and all-powerful, you Christians who believe God is all-loving and all-powerful have a problem. But the reality of that's never been our position, is that God is all-powerful and all-loving. I think that's not all of our position. Our position is that God is all-powerful, all-loving, and all-knowing. And it's the all-knowing aspect that solves the conundrum, because it turns out that you just don't know. We don't know what God achieves on the 100th domino down when he pushes over domino 1. And what we see all the time is in these shootings, for example, with law enforcement officers or tragic things, something good ends up happening sometimes as a result of this that you could not have imagined achieving at the point of the tragedy. And so a lot of it is, because God is all-knowing, that's why you're saying, well, is there any good reason? Well, yeah, it would take an all-knowing God, though, to know the reason. So I think the all-knowing aspect of God is what solves the conundrum.
Well, just think of quarantines and lockdowns and everything that we've faced the last couple of years. These are on a certain level evil to people who have to put up with these things. But the argument of the government is, yeah, we get it, but there is a greater good that's in view here that will accomplish by doing these things. Now, whether or not they're correct in that is not the point. The point is there is a legitimate way of understanding the exercise of power to allow. Let me put it this way: to allow things that, in some sense, are bad for people if there is an outcome that people have a reason to believe is good. Now, the omniscient part, that guarantees that God knows what the good is. We don't need to know it. The point that Richard was making here is that people object that there is a necessary contradiction within the Christian worldview. And all we have to do is show, well, not necessarily. There are ways that this can be construed, and there are lots of them that are good and thoughtful. But if we can just posit the possibility, then we've escaped the necessary contradiction. But I do want to...
Guy Vet in a debate once brought that up when he said that. Said, while it may be easy for us to imagine what we would do if we had God's power, it's impossible to know what we would do if we had God's knowledge. He actually brought that up in a debate. I thought that is profound.
Yeah,
I think. This famous saying, if I had the power to stop everything and change everything, you would see what I would do if I had that power. But if I actually had all the knowledge I need, maybe I would do nothing.
Yeah.
And that's the idea.
I want to
I want to shift gears here because I got and I know we all have our, okay.
I didn't want to follow that.
And this one is super easy. Listen, this is actually a couple
Oh,
of questions.
Brett can answer that one then.
Oh my God, that's brutal.
Okay,
Boy,
there
this
you
is
go.
like you
There you go.
definitely do it
Memento.
under 22 minutes.
Right. So how can we gracefully, and I don't know what this person means by inclusive because they use that word, but how can we gracefully navigate between being inclusive of LGBTQ plus people and pointing out their errors in a loving way? Go.
Well, I'm not sure what he means by inclusive. That's
the
that's the kicker there, and that's the question I would ask. I need clarification.
Well, I could share some thoughts on this. I think that I get asked this question a lot in conferences. What would be your message to the LGBT community, or what would you say? I'd say nothing different to them than I would say to anyone.
Right.
And that's the gospel to everyone. Jesus is all inclusive in his invitation to repent and believe the gospel, to repent and follow him. And it's the same requirement of absolutely everyone. Every single one of us, every single person who hears the gospel is included in the invitation. But that also means that Jesus said, if anyone wishes to come after me, he must deny himself, pick up his cross, and follow me. And that means we surrender to him everything about ourselves, from what we do with our money to what we do with our bodies to what we do as parents, how we live. Everything comes under the lordship of Jesus Christ. And so Jesus was the most inclusive person when it came to the invitation, but he was also very exclusive when it comes to what happens after that point. So people who reject that, who don't want to receive that invitation, essentially that's what hell is Jesus giving everybody what they want.
chose,
I mean, people who don't want, there are people who hate God in this life. I don't understand why they would want to be in his presence forever. So there's no one specific sin where that message is going to change. So it's inclusive in the invitation, exclusive in what happens after that point is how I might put it.
Yeah, I think so much in our culture has been politicized, right? So this is one of those issues that sometimes I think for us as Christians, there's some lines that get blurred between policy issues and kind of our personal interactions with people. And so I wonder if maybe what's going on with this kind of question is from a policy perspective and the common good of the culture, we feel like we need to make our arguments and we need to persuade the majority of people in our culture to push a certain legislation or hold a certain view for the common good, right? And then I think maybe we sometimes import that into this topic on a personal level. And we think, well, kind of my primary goal with my LGBTQ friends is to convert them from their homosexuality to heterosexuality or something like that. And I think I just want to make clear that's not our primary goal on a personal level with individuals, right? Our goal is not to convert them from their homosexuality primarily, but it's to convert them to Christ.
Sinfulness, yeah.
Yeah, and so that I think is on a personal, relational level. That's I think what we want to focus on. And so I think the implication is treat them like you would treat anyone else.
Anybody else? Yeah.
Just like any of your friends, any of your non-Christian friends. Like my non-Christian friend who's sleeping with his girlfriend.
Right.
I don't go to him every day, and say, "Hey, you still sleeping with your girlfriend? You need to stop that." My primary conversations with him are about the gospel and the nature of the gospel. And so I don't hone in on that specific sin because it's.
Yeah, let me say something about that, Brett, too. I think one of the things that as a church that's happened is we've been love shamed by the LGBTQ community. And when I really think about it, I've been a Christian for 30 years. I can't think of a single Christian in my walk personally that I would say, oh, he just hated homosexuals. I can't think of a single Christian that wouldn't agree that we don't need to love the LGBTQ plus community. I think it's a narrative that's been picked up and repeated. And frankly, I'm tired of feeling like we're bullies. I think that the reality is the LGBTQ plus community can learn a little bit about showing some love back to the Christian community just because we don't agree with them. When you see Gay Pride Month being pushed in our face and people prancing around San Francisco as doing the dances that they're doing, if a husband and wife were doing that, we would be criticized. In fact, there are even homosexuals in the LGBTQ plus community that recognize that it is too much of that is what's causing so much frustration from the Christian community. So I don't think us sharing truth means that we're not being loving. I think that what people are really saying is, if you're going to show love, then you need to agree with our narrative. And that's just the point that we can't fall into. And really, honestly, what I would hope for now is we would just get look, everybody's out of the closet except the church. The church has went into the closet. We've been silent. We've went mum. And nobody wants to speak up because the enemy has worked perfectly. If you're Satan, what are you going to do? You're going to use the greatest thing that God's given us to do, to love God and to love the world. And now we feel like we're being unloving if we don't agree with the LGBTQ community. And I think we can accept them without agreeing with them. But unfortunately, we've been love shamed. And I would just say, hey, it's time for us to quit being bullied on this, and we need to find our voice again.
That's good. That's good.
I think what you just said there, Bobby, trades on the society's misunderstanding of love. Society thinks love means approval, right? You have to approve of me and even celebrate me if you're going to love me. Now, we know that as parents, that's not true, right? If we approve of everything our kid wants to do, we're not loving, we're unloving. So I think that's the first thing we need to say. And I think if we're talking to our friends, at some point you might want to say to them, hey, look, if you thought I was going down the wrong road that was going to hurt me and hurt others, would you love me enough to tell me? What are they going to say? No, I wouldn't love you enough to tell you. Well, you've just, when they say yes, then they've just given you permission to do that for them.
Faithful are the wounds of a friend, Proverbs says. There you go.
Yeah. So the reason that we want to point this out is because we love them, not because we don't.
Yes.
It wouldn't be, it would be unloving to say, oh, do whatever you want. I don't care. Yeah, you're on your way to perdition. You're on your way to a difficult life. I don't care. That's unloving. Yeah. Or to celebrate, it's even worse. Mm-hmm. And in fact, when it comes to a political issue, there's only three things a government can do on any issue. It can prohibit a behavior, permit a behavior, or promote a behavior. And in our country, we've gone from prohibit to permit, now to promote. Now we're promoting same-sex relationships as if they are equal to opposite-sex relationships. And from just a biological standpoint, which how can we say biology is now controversial? It shouldn't be. From a biological standpoint, that's just not true. A man and a woman can procreate. A man and a woman can procreate. 2 men, 2 women can't. And the foundation of society is a biological 2-parent family.
Yeah. Just one last thing too is the whole prancing thing that I mentioned. Mm-hmm. I really do think, like, even if you are homosexual, just have some modesty. Like, I wouldn't prance around with my wife in the streets just because I'm married and I'm trying to celebrate my love. So why is it because you're homosexual, you get to go out and do all of this illicit kind of, behavior in front of kids and everything else? I feel like even if you are going to run with the homosexual narrative, I don't think a little bit of modesty is too much to ask for either. So I feel like that probably would sound very much like a prude. But, we need to establish the why as well. If we're going to teach people, why does God have the sexual ethic that he does? For example, there would be no such thing as an STD had we followed God's sexual ethic. Mm-hmm. The reason there's STDs is because we haven't followed it. Why would God want us to wait for marriage in order to have sex? Because he wants us to practice self-control. He wants us to know what it's like to wait. Those that don't practice self-control aren't able to be faithful. Then when they're not faithful, then they experience consequences and they lose their spouse. God doesn't want us to know the shame and the guilt that comes along with being unfaithful as a spouse. God wants us to have relationships that are built on security and trust. How can you have security and trust? It's like when I used to travel around the country speaking for family life, this one person came to the conference and she said, when I was dating my husband, he used to say, I can't wait, I can't wait. So we would have sex. But now that we're married and he's traveling on the road, I wonder what's going to happen if he can't wait and I'm not there. Insecurity and trust have come in the relationship. So what if we're serving a God that's not Victorian after all, but he's a God who wants us to know a blessed life. He wants us to know how to not cave into all of our impulses. He wants us to know that we can have relationships of trust, security, no STDs, no consequences, no shame, and no guilt, so that we can enjoy oneness with our spouse.
And babies being born in real families.
In real families, yeah.
That's a big part of it.
I got a good one here by Danny. She asks, how do you all remain strong in the faith despite being bombarded by doubt-provoking questions all the time?
Wait, how do you stay strong in the faith?
How do you stay strong in the faith despite being bombarded by doubt-provoking questions all the time?
Well, just very quickly for me, is the questions that I hear do not provoke doubt in my mind because I know that there are answers to the challenges. And this is one of the reasons that we do apologetics. I don't know if you remember the time a couple of years ago, 3 or 5 years ago, we were in Canada together, and we were asked to speak before a little vignette before a bunch of pastors at breakfast. And I had to follow Jim, which is always a hard thing to do, you know. But my point was simply this, that for you pastors in your congregation, if you introduce apologetics to your people, you're going to help them answer the toughest critic they will ever face, and that's themselves. The toughest critic you'll ever face is yourself. And that's the tough times. In the middle of the night, you're alone and you have these questions, the doubts, somebody brings something up. If you don't know how to answer that, how do you get back to sleep? Well, I get back to sleep because I know the answers to these things, okay? So I'm not tempted. It's not that I never have doubts in my life. I do. But usually it's other circumstances that have to do with, like, why didn't God answer my prayer? Not maybe he's not there, because I know too much to go in that direction. And so this is something that just tremendously helps me as a follower of Christ. We help other people, it's great, but this is also for us individually. And I think this is people who ask questions like that. I'm glad for the question, but the answer is this is where you need to understand some of the reasons why we have convictions that we do.
It's also, too, I think you would agree that you didn't get there overnight. None of us started out our Christian life where we didn't have any doubts. I think all of us probably went through periods off and on, but it's a cumulative accrual of knowledge and understanding. So that, and it doesn't happen automatically. It has to be cultivated, right? So if a person is negligent about their church life, fellowship with other Christians, attentive to the truths of God in whatever format in their Bible study and reading, if they're not deliberately trying to cultivate these things, just like bodybuilding, as you can tell I'm an expert at, you're not just going to automatically be healthy. You got to pay attention to your diet and exercising. You're not going to automatically be spiritually healthy. You got to cultivate these things.
I'll tell you something too. I think doubt sometimes comes from a position. We'll talk about, have you ever doubted? Well, for me, I was the doubter all the first 35 years before I became a Christian. I had to come in by first removing the doubts. That was the door through which I had to come in. So now that I've went through that door, I don't ever like just go backwards, because I mean I get it. I know what the questions are. I held all those skeptical positions. So I think it is helpful, and I think that's part of the problem we have too for how we enter. Like, what is the gate through which we ask people to arrive into the worldview we call Christianity? If the gate is entirely evidence free, if it's entirely just a matter of an experience you might have, or without an unexamined approach to this, well, then I think you are going to encounter doubts at some point, because at some point you are going to cross those questions that we ought to be crossing as part of the entry point. Like, this ought to be part of the gate we walk through, and if it is, well, then I think we have less doubts on the other side of the gate. But that's not the gate we're walking through. And then we wonder why sometimes as a community we maybe are not, we might question and say, are we the most thoughtful community we could be? Is the gate through which we enter maybe a little bit, is it the same kind of gate we might, for example, ask if I was a Mormon entering into Mormonism, or if I was entering into any other worldview? Or are we really taking the time to present this as the robust, it's quite possible to enter for evidential reasons into this worldview. But if you don't, then I think you will have questions at some point.
Well, one other problem. Well, maybe you're going to say this, Brett.
Another 20 minutes.
What are you going to say? Let me think.
If we can limit your comments here to 2 minutes.
How sexual sin encourages doubt in people. I mean, if you were mentioning all these disciplines and stuff, but if they're sleeping around doing all the stuff, then Christianity becomes very inconvenient.
So does drug use, especially psychoactive drugs, can induce doubt, I believe, as well.
Well, I was going to add, in partly, to answer this question. There's good God, these people. I don't even think half these guys are Christians, so pray for them. Look, there's the rational component of it. That's a vital part, and I think we can answer these challenges. The longer that you do that, it strengthens your beliefs, right? There's not just the content of a belief, but then there's the centrality of it. There's the strength of it. All of that together, when you study the evidence, you answer those questions, you bring these ideas more to the center of your life. They get strengthened, and over time you can resist, the kind of those cultural challenges. In addition to that, I want to add the experiential piece. I think in my experience, as I see people who are living out this true worldview, I just don't have examples of, by and large, people who are flourishing like Christians. Mm-hmm. And I know that goes against the cultural narrative, right? Christians are whatever, hate-filled bigots and whatever. But this is why I stay plugged into my local church, because I get to see day to day, hands-on, real-life stuff where people are flourishing because they're living their life according to that truth. That's right. They're living their life according to the way they were designed to live, and they're flourishing. And I've experienced it myself. As I have tried to love Jesus by following his commands, I have experienced flourishing. And I look around at my skeptical friends, my non-Christian friends, my Mormon friends, whoever, who are living outside of the prescribed plan and laws of God, and I don't see the flourishing I see in the Christian community. Doesn't mean we're all perfect, doesn't mean it's always a happily ever after, but by and large, there's a quality and a texture to the life of believers that I don't see anywhere else. And that also, I think, speaks to the truthfulness of this, and that provides an anchor for me, is that lived, well, I don't want to say lived experience, but
no, that's good.
I don't want to say that means a whole other thing in today's context.
I want to say that I want to give an opportunity for you guys to share whatever you have in your heart with our audience. But before that, I want to ask Richard something, because it has to do with his favorite argument, right? There's a guy here to ask, how do you go from arguing the beginning of the universe and the existence of God to a cause that has to be personal?
Because I don't argue from the beginning of the universe. The argument that Aquinas would give is indifferent as to whether the universe was eternal or began a finite time ago, because it's based on some fundamentals. Starting to do the beginning of the universe now, I just switched over. Okay.
Yeah, that's good timing, man. Good topic.
Like, what do you mean?
And
are we still
we're
on?
out.
We're live.
We're alive? We're still live? No way.
Well, that's pretty good.
Let me
Lost
see.
power here for a second.
Lost power in
Oh yeah, we're still live. Sure enough.
I
Look
didn't
at
know I
that.
had that much power.
Wow.
All right, well, let's keep
Okay,
it going.
So apparently, whatever Richard was about to say.
Don't believe. Do not believe it.
Yeah, that's right. Whatever I was about to say, Satan interrupted me and knocked out the power. But the argument, I'm not sure I know exactly where I was.
It doesn't require the beginning.
Yeah, it does. It's indifferent. It's indifferent because it's based on the application of certain principles in metaphysics that I think arise from just normal experiences of the physical world around us. Like, for example, you see a brown dog walking by the fireplace getting warmed. And I think any normal person, if you ask him, say, do you see a difference between the dog and the brown of the dog? That the dog is a thing, a substance. The brown, it's real, but it's not a thing like the dog. It's only in the dog, right? So that's a substance distinction in Aristotle right there. And I think you can just go down just normal human experiences and begin to say, look, here are these metaphysical truths, the difference between a substance and its accident, the difference between the dog walking and the dog being brown. The walking isn't a thing either. It's in the dog, but it's not like the brown is in the dog. So all of a sudden you'll eventually create, I think, the fundamental elements of Aristotle's metaphysics. If that's true, then what my point is, you can take those fundamental metaphysical observations. They are just the ingredients of Aquinas' argument that demonstrates not only the existence of God, but all of these superlative attributes. Now, that have to be unpacked. It's indifferent to whether the universe ever existed, ever began to exist, even if it was eternal. Just like a boot in snow from all eternity, let's say. The print of the boot in the snow still depends on the boot, even if both of those were eternal. So even if the universe was eternal, it still requires God as its cause for its existing at every moment that it exists. Again, all that will have to be unpacked. But to the questioner, the gap isn't this, got to get to a beginner of the universe. And I think a lot of times you give that argument, the universe began a finite time ago, there must have been a cause. I think most people would just go, sounds like God to me. But there are people out there that they go, well, how do you know that this God is good? Or how do you know there's only one? These are Humes. And I go, all of those questions are all answered by the same philosophical argument that Aquinas gives. Now, how that looks, what that looks like, I actually going to mention this a little bit in my plenary, that the people that are watching live right now won't have any access to. So that's why I brought it up, just to rub it in their face that they're not going to
They need to come to the CIA next year.
Let me just throw something else. So the question is, how do we get from a God, any version of God, to the personal God, right? So I think there's a couple ways to do this. And one of them is looking at the kind of cumulative evidential case, right? Part of this case is going to include moral law. How do we get moral obligations, right? And that's part of it. If moral obligations are transcendent, if they are objective moral truths, well, then how do we ground those kinds of morals? We talk about this all the time. Right. So the best grounding for these is that it's something other than a group of subjects or a single subject, that there is something that transcends subjects objectively about moral truth. And if it's a moral obligation, remember that I have no moral obligation to this microphone. I can punch it all I want. I'm not obligated to objects. Moral obligations are always between persons. I can't do this to him, but I can do this to this, because that's what obligations rest between persons. If there are objective, transcendent moral obligations, there has to be an objective, transcendent moral person to whom I'm obligated. So a lot of this, the nature, even if there's information in the DNA and in genetics, if that is really information, well, then you know it has to come from the personal mind, because information always. If I see blood spatter on the wall, it could be any cause. It could be an accident. He fell and hit his head, and there's blood spatter. But if on that same wall I see written in his blood, he deserved it. Well, now I'm looking for a suspect, right? Why? Because clearly that information is something different than what physics can cause. Physics could never be the person but to whom I'm obligated. Physics could never be the person behind the mind in genetic information. So you're going to move pretty quickly just on the kind of cumulative evidence for God from just the abstract notion of God to personal God.
When you go from the beginning argument, Richard's argument or Aquinas' argument isn't from the beginning, but if you do use the beginning argument, the only kind of cause that could go from nothingness to a creation is a cause that can make a choice, and only persons make choices. So you'd have to have a mind to make a choice to create out of nothing, and that's one way you can get there.
Yes, because otherwise it'd be infinitely old. If it's not infinitely old, it has a beginning, and things that have a beginning, you have to make a decision about to begin. So that's part of it too. So you can get it from all of those, but if you look at like the 7 or 8 kind of evidences for God's existence, it turns out about half of those are really best inferenced as belonging to a personal God, not just an impersonal force.
Yeah, and even the idea of guilt, that's what I did my research on with the moral argument, and I think that that's something that tells us about God and his goodness. It feels personal when we break a moral law. It feels like we didn't violate some abstract Platonic object, but rather it feels as though we've offended someone. And so the idea of an offense, it requires a person to be offended. Objects aren't offended. Right. You don't offend a Platonic abstract object, but you do offend a personal being. And the interesting thing about it is it's a universal experience, guilt, which would mean that it would require that the personal God is omniscient because he knows that we've all sinned universally. It's cross-culturally. We all have that sense that goes on in our life of guilt. So I think that we can get at a lot just through what we experience as it relates to the moral law and our guilt going up to God. And I also think, too, guilt refutes the whole idea that God is a malevolent God, because when we feel guilt when we do wrong, because it's a good God telling us that we've acted unfashionably, that we've acted contrary to his moral law. So I think that the idea of guilt can break apart arguments where people want to
It's also true for our moral code as Christians. They would just accept a different moral code. In their code, there would also be something that you would say is wrong to do or right to do.
Yeah.
And you still are stuck then with that sense of obligation. Who am I letting down? Who am I feeling bad about?
Yeah.
Well, one of the things I like so much about Jim's book, God's Crime Scene, is he looks at a lot of these different areas, the cumulative case. Jeez, no more drugs for that guy. So what I really like, though, is a point that Jim has made in the book, is even on any of these particular cases, people can imagine different ways of answering it than the theistic answer. But what's interesting about our case is that we can answer all of these things with one personal God. Right. He answers everything. And so actually, I added a line to this that you didn't add it to your talk. And that is, not only do we have one suspect, so to speak, that fits all the evidence, but we also have a signed confession, which is the Word of God. Yeah. So that's what I think one of the powerful things about Christianity, that you don't have to go in all these different directions to try to cover the questions that are being asked and raised, cosmology and information and all of that, morality, but we have one answer that covers them all in a way that's intuitively satisfying, that resonates with the deepest intuitions of our minds, and that's wonderful. Plus, you got a signed confession.
All right, guys. So
Bible.
it is 8 o'clock. Frank, you want to say something to just see us off here? And I want to thank Diego for being behind the controllers. Thank you I don't know how he did it, but he kept it going while the light went out.
Yeah, for those of you that are watching here on the Cross-Examine website, you probably know everybody here, but in case you don't, richardghowe.com. You need to check out his website. Great stuff there. Jim is at coldcasechristianity.com. If you don't have his Person of Interest book, you can't be a Christian. Also, we know Stand to Reason, str.org. By the way, that's a 501c3 too. You can donate to Stand to Reason. Of course, Alisa Childers, alisachilders.com. If you're not subscribing to her podcast, Where Are You? Why Aren't You Doing That? It comes out at least once a week. My mother listens to that, doesn't even listen to mine, listens to Alisa Childers. That's right. The great Jorge Gills at crossexamine.org, as you know. Brett is at maventruth.com, maventruth.com. And for those of you out there who are trying to get youth engaged, like you teach them, but they don't retain it, they don't really care. You need to go to maventruth.com to figure out how you can alleviate that problem overnight almost. Bobby Conway, a pastor, also 1minuteapologist.com. What's the Image Church? What's the website there for that?
imagechurch.live. And by the way, the rest of us, because Greg got like a financial push, like Maven, like they'll take some.
We'll take some donations. Some of that Maven money. Yeah. Maven money.
So if you donate to Cross-Examine, God has cattle on 1,000 hills. These folks here could all use your support as well. They're out there doing the Lord's work. So check them all out. You ought to listen to their podcasts as well. In fact, Greg has 2 podcasts. He has the regular Stand to Reason and #STRask, which I listen to a lot. Of course, Jim has podcasts too that you can listen to as well. You have a podcast going? You and Aaron do. What is that?
Yeah.
It's Maven Parent Podcast.
Yeah. Maven Parent
awesome.
Podcast.
Yeah.
Okay. So you guys got a wealth of information now. Great apologists. They're all CIA instructors here for a good reason. They're the best in the world. So check them out, and we'll see you here next time.